World Storytelling Cafe, and it is Friday, so it is stories for children. Louis and all his friends all around the world. And tonight we are proud to have to have the phenomenal, the extraordinary, the amazing Maria Gillen. Maria, over to you.
Oh my God, Jan, I really hope I can live up to that fantastic introduction. This is why that man has a top hat, because he's gone to the top hat school of introductions. And I feel absolutely amazing now, as if I can tell really great stories. Um, so this is Children's Storytelling Day, and Louis, who is here every week, I'm going to dedicate my first story to you, Louis. Oh, I'm getting a great old wave from him as well. So this story happened in County Kerry. I'm the storyteller in residence in Listowel Kerry Writers Museum, and they have an awful lot of magic there. And they have so many writers that you can't walk down the road and you'll meet a poet or somebody who's written a novel or a playwright. The great John B. Keane came from there, and Mickey McConnell and the Marster, loads and loads of people. So this is a challenge that was given to me by America. They said, will you write a story for the dragonflies, because it's an International Insect Day? And this is the story that came out of that. Once upon a time, many years ago, in the time outside time, Listowel was just as beautiful and green as it is today, a little gem sitting in the beautiful sea. But don't you know that it was a very different place back then? Back then, the She rules the land. The She is the Irish word for fairies, and Rina She, king of the fairies, was absolutely delighted with himself, because that year the apples grew fat and red and rosy. And that year, instead of just one egg in the crow's nest, there was 3 eggs, 3 new babies that they were absolutely delighted to see. And the cows in the field, they were trying to talk. They were saying, moo, move over there, because there was so many cows that there didn't seem to be enough room for them inside in the fields. But there were other signs too. And Rena She began to get a little bit afraid. There would be a shadow in the morning over the sun, or the snout of Ambradan Fassa, the salmon of knowledge, would come up from the water, and it would look around with its fishy eye. And Rina She knew that he was being called to the bank of the River Feel in Listowel. So down he went, and he conferred with Ambradan Fassa, the salmon of knowledge. What's happening, my friend? What's happening? He asked the fish. It's time for change, the salmon let him know. And then he asked the crows, do you agree? Do you agree with Ambradan Fassa? I agree, said the crow. Oh no, said the Rena She, for these things had all been foretold, and now it was happening in his time. So his neck got heavy. Do you know the way your neck gets heavy, Louis, when you have loads of cares and worries? The way your head kind of falls down in your body like that. And he was walking around the field, and he was thinking heavy thoughts. And his friend, who had been his friend since childhood, knew that there was something wrong. That was the great blue dragon that lived under the big round stones in front of the castle in Listowel. She stuck her snout up, and she peered out and said, Rena She, it's me, you see. Can we have a talk? And Rena She looked at her and said, for you, I always have time. Oh, that's great, she said. And he poured out his heart, for he had known her since she was a pup and he was a boy. And he told her that the changes were coming and that very soon everything fairy must become smaller and must go back into the places of nature, the in-between spaces. Oh, she said, and what about me, Rena she? Can I come with thee? Well, no, he said, there'll be a cost. You'll keep some of your magic, but you will have to become small too, and you will have to live at the edge of the river field. She said, and she sent out her heart, which is how dragons communicate, to the rest of the dragons in the area. They all listened intently, and then from their hearts to her heart, they said they wanted to go with the she-folk. Rena she, I'm full of glee. I'm going with thee, she said. Oh my goodness, said Rena she. Well, that has brightened my day. Now there'll be a cost to you. You're going to get smaller. What other changes will come, she said. Well, your wings will grow and flow and become invisible, he said. Invisible, said the dragon. Oh, I don't know, she said to Rena she. Yes, he said, but they will become iridescent. Iridescent, she said. She tried that word on her tongue. Are you trying that word? Iridescent. What does it mean? She said. It sounds so magic. Well, it means that even though your wings are invisible, that they will reflect every color the world has to offer. Greens and blues and browns, oranges and golds and silvers, earthen colors and jewel colors, all of them will dance across your wings. Oh, Rena she, I like that idea, she said. And so the bargain was struck and the night was appointed. It was Lunasa night, the first night of August, on that summer so long ago. And all of the she-folk gathered everything they owned and walked down the earthen path that follows the river all the way to the field that held the standing stones, the fairy cathedral. And Rena she stood right in the middle of that round stone and sent out his magic on the heads of the she-folk. And they felt the changes. They felt themselves shrink and get smaller. They felt everything around them growing until a blade of grass was as big as an oak tree. And while this was happening, and while their eyes were closed, similar changes were happening to the dragons. Their bodies elongated and got really thin, and their wings grew and flew and flowed right out to the edges of those long, skinny bodies. And when they opened their eye and the big Lunasa full moon began shining down, every colour promised by Rena she danced across those magical wings. And that is how dragons became dragonflies. And if you ever see a dragonfly, you know it's fairy, its little she is not far behind. So I hope you liked that story. That was my first story, and that was especially for Louis, who comes every week. Thank you for coming, Louis, because without an audience, we don't have any stories. Now, let me see. What story will I tell next? I think it has to be a fairy story too. We have lots of fairies in Ireland. Let me think. Once upon a time in Cork, there was no money. People said that it was a poor country, but the people living here didn't know that it was poor. They opened their doors every morning and ran out of their houses and said, "Hello, how are you?" to all of the neighbours. And it wasn't unusual for them to throw their arms around one another and give one another a big old hug. In those days, the women wore black shawls. They wore these shawls to save their clothes because, you see, there was no money to buy new clothes. And they wore the same clothes all week and their best clothes on Sunday. In this time, the moms used to bring all the children into a forest on the banks of the River Lee, where I live. And the children loved it there. And they'd say to their moms, "Mom, what will we play? What will we play?" And the moms would look at them and they'd say, "Children, use your imagination." I'm going to ask you now, if you were in a place with lots of trees and you didn't have any money, what kind of games would you play? Let me think. I'm going to go into the chat here and I see, chasing. Yeah, that's a great game to play. Chasing would be a brilliant game. Cops and robbers. Yes, John Rowe, that would be a mighty game to play. What's that, Baba? Hopscotch. Yeah, of course you could play hopscotch. Have we any other games? Of course, Mike, you'd have climbing trees. Of course you'd have climbing trees. You'd climb right up to the top and then you'd be able to see the whole city of Cork, and all of this without spending a bob. Isn't that amazing? Well, these children, they laughed and laughed so much and they were so kind to one another that, do you know what happened? This is what happened. Do you know what sound that is? That's the sound of fairies being born. Lots and lots of fairies are born when children laugh. And the children of Cork were so full of joy and so happy that they couldn't stop laughing. And lots of fairy babies were born. And the fairies were delighted. "Oh my goodness," they said, "we'll have to get more trees," because fairies lived in the roots of the trees. They were so happy that they decided that they would give the children 3 wishes. 3 whole wishes to share. "Who will we send?" they said. "Who will we send?" There was one fairy there, and her name was Clodagh Fairy. She used to wear a big pink skirt, and she had long red hair, and she had really appley cheeks, and she smiled a lot. And they said, "Clodagh Fairy, we're going to send you." Now, when Clodagh Fairy was happy, her skirt used to grow. But this day, she was so happy that her hair grew too, until she was a big ball of happiness. And out she flew to tell the children the good news. What size is a fairy? Show me now in the screens what size a fairy is. Mike, what size is a fairy? No, Mike, that's the size of a leprechaun. Yes, Baba, it's that size, the size of a fuzzy bumblebee. And we know this because of the size of the fairy doors. So when Clodagh Fairy flew out all excited, and she was buzzing around Fitzgerald's field, do you think they saw her? Not at all. Of course they didn't see her. Would you see a bee flying around? You might see it, but would you take any notice? So she was exhausted. She thought, "Why are the children not seeing me?" And then she had a brilliant idea. "I know what I do," she said. "I land on somebody's nose." So she landed on Becca's nose, and Becca said, "Oh my God! Oh my God! What's that?" And she was just about to squash this thing on the end of her nose when the other children went, "Don't, Becca, don't do it. We thinks it's a fairy." So they all gathered around Becca and they all looked at the end of her nose and they said, "It's a fairy, Becca. It's a fairy." So Becca put her finger up and Clodagh hopped onto her finger and she said, "What do you want to tell us?" And Clodagh fairy said, "Ye have 3 wishes. We're so happy because you're laughing all the time and loads of fairy babies have been born." "That's marvellous," said the children. And they sat down and they put their arms around one another to make a plan as to what they would like in their Fitzgerald's field. What would you like if you got 3 wishes? Well, after a while, they came to a decision. And Becca, who still had Clodagh fairy on her finger, said, "We've come to a decision, Clodagh fairy. We would like a swing, but not just any swing, Clodagh fairy, a magical swing, a swing that when you're feeling tired will rock you gently like your mom does, or a swing that will know that you want full excitement and goes woo, 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 you, or a swing that smells delicious and you can just put your head on the rope and go for a little snooze for yourself." And then she put Clodagh fairy down on the ground. "That's no problem," said Clodagh fairy. And she put her teeny tiny little magic wand to the ground. And then she went over to the other side and she put it to the ground again. Oh my goodness! What happened then, do you think? Out of the ground came this big stick and it kept growing and growing. And when they looked on the other side, there was another stick, a twin stick, and they grew just to the height of a nice swing. And then they could see that the branches had leaves. 2 little trees to make a swing. Amazing! And then a rope started to curl its way out of both trees. If a rope is alive and it's coming out of a tree, what do you call that? Go on now, put it into the chat for me. What do you think you'd call that? That's right. Somebody got it right. I think it was Louis. It's a vine. And Mike has a vine that he's showing me. I know nobody else can see it. Mike, how did you have a vine to hand? That's amazing. That's a bit of magic in itself. So the 2 vines grew out of the tree. Down they came, almost to the ground, and then they joined together. And I can see it happening in Mike's place right now. A little bit of magic of our own. And then this little girl jumped up out of the circle, ran to where the swing was swinging, and jumped on top of it. It started to sway gently this way. And then it swayed gently that way. And then it swayed gently this way. And everybody began to feel really tired. And then one of the boys said, "It's my turn." So she got off the swing and he jumped up and his name was Owen and he said, "Go faster, swing! Go faster, go higher, go faster, go higher." And the swing went until Owen was just a blur in the middle of the sky. And everybody was clapping their hands. They were having such a good time that they almost forgot that they had 2 more wishes. So Clodagh fairy had to fly all the way up and land on Becca's nose again. And Becca said, "What is it? What is it, Clodagh?" And Clodagh fairy said, "What about your other 2 wishes?" And this little boy stepped forward and he said, "We decided on a seesaw too. That was my idea and everybody agreed. Can we have a seesaw, Clodagh fairy?" And Clodagh fairy said, "Absolutely no problem." And she took her little magic wand and she hit the ground. And guess what? Straight away, just like that, there was a little seesaw. But it was only that wide. And the little boy looked at her and he said, Clodagh. And she said, what, Seamus? And he said, Claude, I don't think you know what the seesaw is. It has to be longer than that. And she said, yeah, but this is a magic seesaw. And she gave him a big wink. Oh, a magic seesaw, he said, that's amazing. So he ran over and he jumped on top of it and he said, go fast, seesaw. And the seesaw started to go up and down and up and down, and he clapped his hands. And then his friend Connor said, tell him get off, Clodagh Fairy, it's my turn. And she winked at Connor and she said, it's a magic seesaw. A magic seesaw. What do you think that means, children and big children? Yes, Mike, it grew bigger. That's right, John Rowe. They're all making the sign for it to grow bigger, which is what happened. And then one child jumped up behind, boom. And then another child, boom. And another child, until there was 40 children on each side of the seesaw. And it went way up into the air one way and way up into the air the other way. And the children discovered something. There's a place in Cork called Shandon. And up on the top of Shandon, there's a little goldie fish. And everybody thought the goldie fish was that size. But when they went up on the big seesaw, they could see that the fish was just far away and that it was very big. It was as big as two daddies. Imagine that. Imagine two daddies, one daddy sitting on the shoulders of the other daddy. That's how long the goldie fish of Shandon is. It's 11 feet long. You're going to have to come to Cork to see the goldie fish. But anyway, back to the story. They were delighted with their seesaw. And then they said, what are we going to do for our third wish? It's going to have to be something really special. And as they were talking about it and discussing it, somebody saw that Clodagh Fairy was flying away. She was flying away deep into the forest. And they said, Clodagh Fairy, where are you going? What about our third wish? And she said, I'm just going to find something for the third wish. And they said, do you know what it is? She said, I've heard whisperings, but you tell me. So they said, Clodagh Fairy, we'd like a slide. And not just any slide. A curly slide, a slide that makes you go woo, woo, woo as you come down. That's no problem at all, said Clodagh Fairy, but I have to find the biggest, best, fattest tree in the whole of Fitzgerald's field for that. We'll help, said the children. So they went looking. What about that tree, Clodagh Fairy? They said. No, she said, that's not fat enough. What about this tree? Said the children. No, she said, that's not tall enough. And then right in the centre of Fitzgerald's field, they found their tree. It was so fat that 10 children had to put their arms out as wide as this, and they had to hold their tips of their fingers together to be able to put themselves around the tree. Imagine. It was 10 children wide, that tree. And when you looked at the tree, did you ever look up at something and you had to put your neck back? It would be kind of like this, and that would be very high, maybe a very high building. But did you ever look at something that was even higher in the sky, maybe an aeroplane, and you were right under it, and you'd have to go back even further? Well, the only way they could see the top of this tree was to lie down on the ground. That's right, Mike and Baba and John. You had to lie on the ground and look up as if you were looking at the clouds. Did you ever make anything out of clouds when you were small, lying on the ground, looking at the shapes? Oh, Baba, you don't know what you're missing. You're going to have to give it a go. So anyway, they were looking up at the top of the tree and they could see the branches heading off into the sky. And it looked as if the branches was having a dance with the sky, and as if the roots weren't in the ground at all, but that they were floating off into space. And they were enjoying that so much, they almost forgot that they wanted a slide. But Clodagh Fairy didn't forget. She touched the ground, and a magical sound came up from deep within the earth. It sounded like bells and a deep, deep growl. It went right through the earth in Cork. Everybody that was living back then felt it. What was this magic, they wondered. And then the ground started to shake, and up from the ground came this kind of invisible wall. Do you remember the story that I told you about Ree She and his dragon with the beautiful iridescent wings? Well, it was like that, invisible, yet it held every colour the world had to offer. It went round and round and round the tree, climbing higher and higher right up to the sky. And when it was finished, you just knew that it was magical. Now, you know the way children are different. Some children went a small way up the tree and they took a slide down and said, "Whee! That's amazing." But other children, they climbed and they climbed and they climbed. Then they climbed and they climbed and they climbed. Then they climbed and they climbed and they climbed to the tip top of the tree. And then they went, whee! All the way down. And they had big red cheeks and clapping hands when they came to the end. How magical, they all said. And they laughed and they cheered so much that every child in Cork could hear the sound. And Cork is built with 7 hills around the centre. And all the doors opened up and the children spilled down those hills like human rivers until they came to Fitzgerald's Field. And when they came to Fitzgerald's Field, they said, "What's going on here? This looks really magic." And Fitzgerald's Field had to have a great big wall built around it to keep the children and the magic in. When you come to Cork very soon, I'll bring you to Fitzgerald's Park and you'll be able to feel the magic for yourself. There we go. Oh, thank you, Baba. A lovely kiss for my cheek. That's lovely. Did you like that, Louis? Thumbs up. Brilliant. Thank you so much. So let me check my time. Oh, good. I have time for another story. Let me think. I think I'll have to tell you a really old story. A story that's over 200 years old. And it's how plows were invented in Ireland. Do you know what a plow is, people? Men and women and children. Yes, that's right, John Rowe. Sometimes you held it like that and 2 horses went in front of you and you went down into the earth and you furrowed a row. That's why they're called furrows. Isn't that amazing? They still do it like that sometimes. They have the ploughing championships in Ireland and in England, and I think in Wales as well. But this is how that got invented, because it has a big, long blade, and the blade goes into the ground and it cuts the ground into a little row, and then you can plant things and then you can cover up the plant. Isn't that how it works, John Rowe? Yeah, very good. Thumbs up. So once upon a time, there was 2 brothers. They were born at the bottom of Shandon Street in Cork City. Sure, where else? I'm from Cork, so all my stories are from Cork. So they were born at the end of the hill in Shandon Street, and their mother loved them. But you know the way you can have 2 people and their faces are exactly the same, but their personalities are not the same? Well, that's the way it was for these children. One boy was called Sean and the other boy was called John, which meant their mother was very clever, because the Irish for John is Sean or Owen, depending what side of the country you're in. So Sean and John grew up, and Sean was as sorrowful and as cranky and as mean as you could get. And John was as light-hearted and as happy and as singing every morning as you could get. And they were like chalk and cheese. And all through school, they got on okay. But by the time they left school, they didn't want to go out together to the pub. No, because if you went with Sean, he'd empty the pub with his cranky face and him calling, "It's my turn for a pint." And if you went out with John, she would be singing songs until the dawn, and you'd be clapping your hands and stamping your feet and singing all of the familiar songs for yourself. So nobody wanted to be in the pub the night that Sean went. So he used to go on a Thursday night, and everybody wanted to be in the pub on the night that John went. So that would be a Friday night when people got paid and everyone was happy. And so the years were passing. And something strange happened. Both boys began to get a kind of a lump on their back. Now, these days, that would be very easily fixed in the hospital. But in those days, they didn't know how to do that. So their humps got bigger and bigger. That's what they were called in those days. And they got bendier and bendier. And they were big, tall men, over 6 foot tall, which was very tall back then. And the humps made them look really small. And even John began to get a small bit cranky. Wouldn't you, if you had that big thing up on your back? But then he remembered an old song and it cheered him up and he was as happy as ever again. Well, one night John went to the pub, and it was one of those nights, you know, where you meet your best friend and they tell you a story you've never heard before and it just lands in your heart. You know, one of those nights. I know, one of those nights. And then somebody sang an old song and he loved it. I think the song was Trasna down the Dalshire, slow leishan fargas, slow leishan fear. And he was singing it away to himself. And he just thought, I don't want to go home to that place where I share a room with Sean. I'll go in and he'll say, "Stop creaking the door, you're waking me up." Or he'll say, "Stop boiling the kettle. This is not the time for tea." So he thought to himself, I'm going to go for a walk instead. I'm going to enjoy the beautiful night. And there was a big October moon in the sky, and it was shining down over the lake in the heart of Cork City, known as the Loch, where the swans live and the ducks and all sorts of magical creatures. Nobody knows how that lake was made. It doesn't have a source. But in the middle of the night one night, they began to hear this gurgling sound. And when they came out, there was the great lake known as the Loch. Everybody said it was magic. And he was remembering this fact when he saw the moon beginning to shine down on the water as he walked up the narrow old streets, the cobbled streets, and he leaned against the wall. And then he heard it. Then he heard the beautiful music. It sounded like it was being played on the fiddle. "Oh, that's gorgeous," he said. "De luan de mort, de luan de mort, de luan de mort," went the beautiful music, tinkling like bells under the silver of the moon. But then it was the same beat again. "De luan de mort, de luan de mort," which means Monday, Tuesday, Monday, Tuesday, Monday, Tuesday. And he thought to himself, don't they know the Irish words for the other days in the week? Maybe I'll give him a hand. And he was sucking on his pipe as he thought. So they began to play the tune again. "De luan de mort, de luan de mort." And as soon as they stopped, he went, "De luan de mort is de Cairdean, Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday." Everything stopped. The ants stopped. The birds stopped. The fairies who'd been singing the songs stopped. And then they put their little heads around the wall. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. All the way into the hundreds. And they all looked at John and they all blinked their eyes at him at exactly the same second. And he was afraid. And they put the come hither on him. In Ireland, it's called Tarcuum, Tarcuum, come to me, come to me. And he couldn't stop, even though all he wanted to do was go home. His feet had different ideas and they began walking them towards the loch, towards the water. No, he said, don't drown me. Tá brónarim. I'm sorry, he said, I'm sorry. But the fairy said, no, you're going to love it where we're bringing you. You're going to love it. And they did something to the water and it just began to divide. And then he could see that there were steps under the loch, all the way down, lots of steps. And he couldn't help it. His feet began to climb down those steps. And down at the end of the steps, who did he see? Only Rena she. Who are you? Says he. Rena she. John, said John. And then the Rena she put his head to this way and he put his head that way and people began to whisper into his ears. What's happening? They said. What's happening? And he said, oh, I think you put an extra word into our song and it's magnificent, said Rena she. It's completely magnificent. Is it? Said John. Yes, said Rena she, and I'd like to hear it, please. So John cleared his throat and he said, they loo and they mart, they loo and they mart, they loo and they mart as they cared in. The king clapped his hands. Everybody threw out their arms. There was hugs everywhere and smiling faces. That's amazing, said Rena she. We have had the same 2 lines for 10,000 years, and now you've given us the next line. Oh, thank you very much, he said. Yes, said Rena she. Everybody knows that the Irish language is the language of magic, Changan Driachta, but nobody speaks it anymore. So it's great that you were able to give us an extra line. De Cairdy. I really like that. De Cairdy. Now, what can we do for you? That's all right, said John. I just want to go home. He was getting afraid that they'd keep him there forever. And then Rena she thought about it and he said, no, we can't let you home without giving you a bruntiness, a present. A bruntiness, said John. What could that be? And then he said, do you know what I'd like? I'd like this to be gone, the hump on his back. Well, with that, John flew up into the air and then bang, down he went on the ground. And when he got up again, he got up, but his hump stayed on the ground. Yippee, said John. He felt as light as a feather. He even began to do an Irish jig around the place. And there was no music at that stage because there was no fairies and Rena she was gone. So he climbed those steps, guided by the moon, and he came out over the loch and he walked home, singing to himself. And when he got in, his brother was making the toast and the tea. Said Sean, as in, what time do you call this to come in at? Even though he didn't say words, John knew what he was saying. A miracle happened, said John. A miracle, look. And when Sean looked, he had to stretch up his head to have a look at him because his hump was gone. And Sean said, how did you manage that? I want mine to be gone too. So John, being his twin, told Sean all about it, exactly what had happened. And Sean said to himself, I'm going to go on Thursday when it's my night for the pub. The moon will still be full. I'm going to go on Thursday and I'm going to get rid of my hump too. So he did exactly what his brother did. He landed up the hill. He heard the fairy singing the song with the new line. They loo and they mart, they loo and they mart, they loo and they mart, as they cairdy. And as soon as there was a gap, he went, they dirty, they hina, they sovereign, they downlock. And that was Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. But he shouted it. He didn't sing it. It didn't sound beautiful. It didn't sound magical. It made the fairy's ears sore. because they only like to hear beautiful things. And they got very, very cross faces, just like Sean's face. And they said, Tarcoam, Tarcoam, come hither, come hither. And he couldn't help it. Just as his brother said, he followed them. But when they split the water, he didn't get to walk down the steps. No, he found he fell. And he landed in a heap in front of Rena She. And Rena She looked at him without pity. And he listened this way and he listened that way. And his face got crosser. And he crossed his arms. And he had a cross face and cross arms. Well, what are you going to give me as a present? Said Sean, very impolite to be talking like that to a king. And the king just looked at him and said, were you dragged up or were you reared, boy? What's that got to do with anything? He said, I'll hear your song now. So Sean said, they know when they marked, they cared, they dared, they Hina, they Saturday, they Sunday, which meant Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. All right. And Rena She looked at him and he said, we know the words, boy, of the ancient Irish language. We know how to put music together, but everybody knows that it's in the betwixt and between that the magic music happens. This was not magic music. Give me what I'm owed, said Sean, very impolite indeed. And the king said, you'll get exactly what you deserve. And up he went into the air and poof, down he went, none too gently onto the ground. And when he got up, he found he was stooped even closer to the ground than before. And when he looked on the ground where his brother's hump had been, he couldn't see any hump because both of the humps were now on his back. And his nose was so close to the ground and it's so wet in Ireland that over time, everywhere he went, he dug a furrow in the ground. And that, they say, is how the plough was invented. Some clever man saw him making his way up the street of a wet, rainy Thursday on his own, digging the earth as he went. And he thought, that could be a plough. I think I'll invent it. That's a very old story, about 200 years old. Did you like that story?
That was beautiful. That was wonderful.
Thank you, John. I think, John, if you're coming in, does that tell me that I've only 10 minutes to go? And
it is. And before Louis goes and before Bubba C goes, it is October the 1st. So in the UK, that is the start of Black History Month. So happy Black History Month.
Whoa! Happy Black History, Baba and Louis. Mwah.
Well, and all of us.
And all of us. Absolutely.
Everyone's, it's not a separation.
It's a coming together, but it's a spotlighting.
It's an inclusion, a coming together.
And the spotlighting. You know, it's lovely to spotlight.
Black history is everybody's history.
Everybody.
It is.
Indeed. And I'm not going to go on any further but that but if you've got one more story and that you have been, I could listen to you forever. You've got one of those voices.
But Maria, I have one small question.
Yeah.
Isn't your story about how Wednesday became Hump Day?
I feel a red thread of story coming on, Baba. I have to hear that story now.
Baba C and Mike are the two naughty boys that always sit at the back of the of the class. What's that? If class could, if you could just settle back into your chairs, children.
Go.
Hiya, David. So,
Maria, have you got one more?
I have one more story. I made this story. I love making stories with people, and I made this story in a nursery school in Glanmire in County Cork. And here's the story. Once there was a boy who lived in Cork. His name was Charlie, and he was the most cheerful boy in the whole of Cork City, in the whole of the country, in the whole of the world. He was just really cheerful. Every morning, his mom would say, Charlie, get up for school. And Charlie would jump out of bed and he'd take off his pajamas, put on his clothes, brush his teeth, wash his face, and come down the stairs, smiling away to himself. What are you smiling at, Charlie? Said his mum. Oh, Mum, I had such a great dream. I think they need to make it into a film. Oh, that's a great idea, Charlie, she'd say. Now, while we discuss that, what do you have for your breakfast? Do you want cornflakes or Weetabix or porridge? And Charlie would say, porridge, Mum. Sure, you make the best porridge in the whole world. And she'd say, Charlie, you light up my life. And he'd say, Mum, that's my job. Oh my goodness, she would have to love a boy like that. And then he'd take his sack and he'd go into school and he'd very carefully open his bag and he'd take out his homework and he'd put it onto the teacher's desk. And she'd say, well, Charlie, how did you get on with your homework? And he'd say, oh, Mrs. O'Sullivan, it was the most interesting homework I've ever done. I learned loads and it was really fun. Oh, Charlie, I love teaching you, she'd say. And the kids loved him too. They'd go playing to monkey maze together. They'd have sleepovers. They'd meet in the park and they'd laugh out loud. So there'd be loads of fairy babies born. They just had a great time. And Charlie's uncle worked in a factory called Faber-Castell that made fantastic pencils. And so if one child broke their pencil, they'd say, here, Charlie, any chance of a pencil? And Charlie would say, of course, there's every chance. Have two. Sure, my uncle works in the pencil factory. Oh, Charlie, you're amazing, they'd say. And then he'd sing all the way home. That was until the day. Dun, 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 dun. A grumpy gobs came to live in the hedge. Do you know what a grumpy gobs is? A grumpy gobs is so cross that they've gone green. Their lip sticks out like that. They have one small eye and one big eye and long, skinny hands. And they can't even talk. They're so cranky. They say, no, Bratton, never. That's what they're like. So they can't live in a house anymore. Well, would you live with someone like that? No, instead, they have to live in the hedge. And this day, the grumpy gobs came to live in Charlie's hedge. He was just settling himself in behind the branches of the tree, looking out when he saw Charlie singing away to himself. Beautiful city, charming and pretty, beautiful city, my home by the lea. Charlie was singing on his way home, and Grumpy Gobs got very cranky. So he took his long, skinny hand and he stuck it into his pocket and he took out the grumpy dust and he blew it all over Charlie. Well, now, I told you that Charlie was the most cheerful boy in the world. So even though his eyebrows kind of came down like that, very soon when he shook his head, they sprung back up again and he skipped in home. Said Grumpy Gobs, and he fell off his stool because he couldn't believe that his grumpy dust didn't work. So while Charlie was doing his homework in the front room, Grumpy Gobs jumped up on the windowsill and he pushed open the top of the window and he took out the grumpy dust and he blew it in on top of Charlie. And Charlie began to feel strange and his eyebrows began to come down over his nose like that. And he began to feel things in his face that he'd never felt in his face before. And then his mom said, Charlie, it's time to go to bed. And he went, all right. And his mother said, what's that, Charlie? He said, I don't know, Mom, I'm feeling a bit strange. That's all right, Charlie. She says, go up to bed, take off your clothes, wash your face, brush your teeth, put on your pajamas, get into bed, and I'll be in to tell you a story. All right, so, Mom, he said. And he made himself go up the stairs. But he could feel himself getting crosser and crosser as he got up to the top of the stairs until when he got up to the top, he gave a big old bang on the top of the stairs. And his mother said, Charlie, are you stamping? He said, I am, Mum. I don't know what's going on. She said, that's all right, Charlie. Everyone's entitled to one cross day. So he took off his clothes, put on his pajamas, washed his face, brushed his teeth, got into bed, and Grumpy Gobs jumped up on his windowsill, opened the top window of his bedroom and blew more grumpy dust in on top of him. There was enough grumpy dust blown in on top of poor 8-year-old Charlie to fell the whole of the Cork hurling team and make them into cranky men. So you can imagine the effect that it had on a small boy. When Charlie's mother came in, she said, what story will we have, Charlie? And Charlie said, stories are stupid! Woo! Grumpy Gobs fell off the windowsill because everyone knows that stories are brilliant. And his mother said, oh my goodness, Charlie, every cross thought must have gathered itself up and now it's coming out. I hope this is gone by tomorrow. Look, let me give you a little kiss goodnight and I'll see you in the morning. No kisses for mummies, said Charlie. And he threw the blanket over his head and he snuggled down in his bed. Imagine not giving any kiss to your poor mum before getting into bed. The next morning, she hoped that it would be gone, so she called him for school. Charlie! What? Said Charlie. Oh God, it's not gone, she said. Get up now, she said. We're going to school. I'm not going. You are indeed, Mr. Going to school, she said, using her cross mammy voice and the waggy finger that you can't argue with. So he got out of bed and he took off the top of his pajamas and put on his school jumper and his shirt, but he didn't tie his tie and he didn't put on his trousers and he only half brushed his teeth and he didn't wash his face at all. And then he went down the stairs and his mother said, well, what would you like for your breakfast? Cornflakes, Weetabix or porridge? And he said, sausages! And she said, no, Charlie, we only have sausages on the weekends. Mommy has to work too. So your choices, young man, are Weetabix, cornflakes, or porridge. What will you have? And he said, nothing. So that's what he got. Nothing. He was sent into school and his stomach was going, and that made him crosser still. Well, he took out his homework and he threw it on the desk. And the teacher said, Charlie, and he said, what's wrong with you? And she thought, oh, better not look sideways at him today. And then one of the children said, Charlie, I broke my pencil. Any chance of a pencil? And he said, you think I made of pencils? You're getting no more pencils off of me. Get your own pencils. So that by the time small break came, there was a big space around Charlie. Nobody wanted to be his friend. And his teacher was concerned. So she rang his mom and she said, Mrs. O'Sullivan, what's going on? And she said, I don't know. Charlie is so cross and he's never cross. I know. She said, well, can you find out? She said, I'll do my best. So she hung up. Now, if you don't know the answer to a problem, or if a mammy doesn't know the answer to a problem, who does she call? The police? No. Yeah, you could call the police, but not on this occasion. Who else? The fire brigade. Yeah, but there was no fire, so no, not this time.
Ghostbusters.
Ghostbusters, that's a great idea, John. But no, it wasn't Ghostbusters either. That's right. It was her own mom. Supernan. So she rang her mom and she said, Mom, what's going on with Charlie? And she told her the whole story. And her mom said, well, do you remember when you were very cross in school for 2 weeks? I do, Mom. What happened, me? A Grumpy Gobs came to live in the garden. Mom, what's that Grumpy Gobs? So she told her everything about the Grumpy Gobs. And then she said, Mom, how did you get rid of the Grumpy Gobs? It has to go. And she said, oh, I use my mommy magic. What's the mommy magic? You know, when you use your waggy finger and your cross voice all at the one time and nobody can disobey you. Yeah, Mom, I do. I'm going to go out and do it straight away. And she was just putting down the phone and went, Mom, how come I don't remember you getting rid of the Grumpy Gobs? Oh, darling, that's because I did it while you were at school. Mom, I'm going to wait until Charlie comes home so that he can see what happens to the grumpy gobs. That's a great idea. That might cheer him up. Right, so, Mom, I'll see you later. See you later, love. Mwah! And the two phones went down. So she waited for Charlie to come home. Well, that was the worst day Charlie ever had in school. He only got 70% on his test because his stomach was going and he couldn't concentrate. Nobody would sit next to him. He heard people planning to go to the park and laugh to make fairy babies, and he wasn't invited. So when he was going home, he was dragging his sack behind him all the way home, and his mother was waiting for him at the gate. Well, young man, she said, come out with me to the garden. No, he said. Right now, she said, using her mommy magic and her waggy finger. So he said, all right. And he put up his hand, and his mother caught him by the hand, and she dragged him to the hedge, and they stood in front of the hedge, and she said, Grumpy Gobs, I know you're in there. Come out here immediately, please. And a big ball of mammy magic made itself up behind Grumpy Gob's back and pushed him out through the hedge. He said, his small eye getting really small, his lip right out and his big eye huge in shock. He said, and the mother said, well, I know you've been blowing grumpy dust at Charlie, so you can get your bags and your baggage and you can leave this place right now. With that, two small green cases came out of the hedge and landed in Grumpy Gob's hands. And as if he couldn't stop himself, his legs started moving and he went out through the front gate. He went right first, then he went left, then he went right again. Now, I don't know where Grumpy Gobs went. So you better tell the big person in your life this story, because they might need to use their mommy magic.
Maria, that was wonderful. But I don't have the mummy voice, you see. I can waggle my finger, but I don't have the mummy voice. Louis enjoying his swim. David's got a big smile. Bubba C's got a big smile. Mike, you can't tell behind all that stuff.
Louis just getting changed.
Yeah. Well.
But I heard Mike has a mummy voice when he wants to. With all those props, it's just another prop.
Fantastic.
Bubba C, be quiet.
Yeah.
Oh, no, that doesn't work.
Naughty boys at the back, just settle down while I announce what's coming up. Next Friday is the amazing Gary Cordingley, which will be great. Who we normally see, or we have seen, hosting Rock the Casbah and the fundraiser for our amazing storytelling festival that's going to happen in Marrakesh in February. We'll do some, Louis' mum will do some virtual stuff, so from Marrakesh, so people who can't get there can say hello, Louis, and so you're not left out of the festival, so and you, David, and so and that's amazing. But so Gary's on Friday, no, before Friday, and David will tell me off if I don't announce this. He'll waggle his David finger at me. Tuesday at 5 o'clock, as every for Tuesday, it is our young tellers. I might invite some that are slightly older than 18, not much older, but we have some students out in Argentina that want to join at some point. Then Friday is Gary Cordingley. Then that Saturday the 10th is our next worldwide story round. So as many people that want to tell stories from anywhere in the world, please come along to that. Meanwhile, have a great swim, Louis. I'll let you go on with your swim. Right. And have a great week, everyone. Good night, everyone.
Good night, everyone. Mike, you don't have a swim prop?
Ollie, thank
Maria,
you.
thank you. Great stories.
Thank you for the magic carpet, and Maria, marvelous.
Thank you, Maria.
Loved it.
Fantastic.
Mwah.
Thank
Thanks, lads.
Look, Louis flexing his muscles.
No, he's getting ready for a swim. Woo, woo.
Louis, can you go swimming without getting wet?
Right, just leave it out, everyone. I'm leaving the meeting. We are leaving the building.
All right, everyone have a fantastic Friday and a wonderful weekend.
All right.
Louis, you're one of my all-time faves. And Louis Peeps. All right, catch you guys later. See you out. Thanks, Ali. Hey, Louis, do you swim with the mask on? Thanks, Ali. How do I close this?